Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday. Let's see, before I start here, just as usual, I want to remind everybody who is new that we use headphones. We have a soundtrack at the end. Headphones is the best way to listen. Many of the tracks that I have a lot of low frequency sound information that won't play through your laptop or through your phone. So headphones also has 3D. It's got binaural beats for entraining your brainwaves and synchronizing the hemispheres. And the whole purpose of this is for all of us to be in a synced up brain state that creates a kind of a scientific mind link among our brain electrical magnetic influences through entrainment to a single soundtrack. I'm going to pop up this address here. This is the address for the soundtrack that we're going to listen to today. Today is an extension of what we talked about last time, the default mode network. We're going to go a little deeper into that. As I said last time, this is really the cutting edge of neuroscience. So this is really breakthrough discoveries in brain science and the science of consciousness and the science of meditation and the science associated with different neurological conditions that respond well to entraining the default mode network back to its proper place. scientificsounds.com/DMN, default mode network. This is the address that we've just opened up last week for feedback from people who are listening to this broadcast, questions, comments, pretty much anything. I went through the last ones. There was quite a few. I answered many. I answered everybody, but some were, the answer was, I will be covering this in future broadcasts. So I have some part of me has a master plan. I release it to this part, and this part organizes each one of these. I have a general idea up here, but nothing really coherent. But I begin a process with a PowerPoint and choose a picture, and one picture leads to the next, and the whole thing unfolds from inside out. That's where these broadcasts come from. And as it unfolds, I'm a witness like anyone else to watch this flower open up with lines of information that weave in and out of each other over a much larger scope of a broad series of broadcasts that weave these tangled little webs of information together into a master plan as we watch this unfold. Keep those coming. This is the address for the YouTube channel that has all of the live broadcasts that I've done since the very first one back in April. So anyone who's new, I encourage you, please watch them in order from the very first one back in April. They stack from the bottom to the top. The latest one, today's, will be at the top. The first one will be at the bottom. And today we're once again going deeper into the default mode network, as I discussed before, where we have these 4 zones in the brain that go down in between the hemispheres, which is what these pictures here are showing. These 4 zones, this one and these 2 frontal, occipital, and the parietal temporal zones on the sides. Back in the beginning, I take a series of magazines and a series of news feeds through my email, and I keep my fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the world in neuroscience, holistic health, medicine, research, quantum physics, astrophysics, things like that. I get a lot of magazines, Scientific American, Science News. This is the one that I've been taking for decades. This little tiny, narrow little magazine used to come out every week. It used to be half the size of this one. And then they changed it to every 2 weeks. But this little magazine has the absolute most cutting-edge discoveries that are happening in the world in science. And it's published here first. I'll sometimes see the information here a month before it hits the news, or before it hits the general population of my other news feeds. So this is one of the more powerful ones that I've seen. And one of the issues had this picture here. And the the article was, "You are who you are by default." And it talked about this brain network that I had never heard of before. It may be off when you're on, but the brain network behind daydreams and a sense of self is no slacker. And what that went on to say was that they had discovered by accident using fMRI machines. The MRI is a nuclear magnetic resonance machine, big tube that you go in, has a huge, gigantic magnet, 3 Teslas strong. Now, you may not know what a Tesla is, but it's extremely strong, and it's so powerful that they have to build it into a special room, $1 million room, because the strength of that magnet, if you have any metallic parts inside your body, it will rip them right out of your body and kill you or injure you severely. So there's elaborate procedures before you can be cleared to go into an MRI. But when you think about it, everything in your body is electromagnetic. Your brain, the ions moving through your nerves, the iron particles in your blood have magnetic properties, electrolytes in the biochemistry of your body. So exposing you to these extremely intense, high-level magnetic fields, they say has no effect on you, and I don't believe it. I think it has a deep effect on you and on your brain function. But be that as it may, how it works is this super powerful magnetic field is so powerful it can flip the protons in your atoms to a different position, and that releases energy. And in combination with radio waves, you can interpret the frequency resonance of the protons of each element of the periodic table. Each element of the periodic table has its own fundamental frequency of the resonance of its protons. They have that chart. You can actually look that chart up, do a Google search for MRI protons or the MRI periodic table. It'll show you the frequency resonance of each of the protons of each of the elements of the periodic table, all vibrating resonance. They're resonating the protons of your atoms like little wine glasses, and they release energy when that happens, and radio waves interpret that and use various mathematical algorithms to create pictures. That's how they see inside your body. How crazy is that, right? So the fMRI is the functional MRI, which means it's a moving picture instead of a snapshot. It's an ongoing process of picture after picture after picture, which makes it look like a movie, like it's moving. And so this is the kind of experiment they were doing with someone in an MRI looking at their brain when they discovered this pulsing of these 4 zones that was 1 pulse every 10 seconds to 1 pulse every 20 seconds. And the soundtrack we used last time was the 1 pulse every 10 seconds. Today it'll be 1 pulse every 20 seconds, deeper, a deeper region of the default mode network. So when I saw that article here, it said, "You are who you are by default." What does that mean? The default function of the brain is this 95% of the function of the brain under the hood, and what we experience as this of conversations out in the world, and we think this is the whole thing, is really only 5% off the top. And what's happening underneath is this mind-wandering idea, a more holographic function of the mind, free to roam. And that roaming appears to be very similar to the kind of roaming the mind does in the dream state or in the shamanic journey state, where we create a whole universe and we populate that and we move through it, and we move through a surreal landscape, allegorical, metaphorical zone of our mind, where all bets are off. And the universe can be anything we choose it to be. And this is where we need to go in order to access the vision of where we want the world to go and what we want it to become in the next moment. I believe that this is close to the key. Scientists are actually calling this the place in the brain where the mind, body hardwire together, and where they hardwire into the limbic system of emotional control. All of this tied deeply together with the autonomic nervous system control centers that tell the organs and glands what to do, linked into the emotions through the vagus nerve, that is the control of the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic controls everything, and the vagus nerve communicates with the gut, and the biome in the gut communicate to the brain directly through the vagus nerve, all linked up together. So after I read this article in Science News, within a month, all of these international research organizations began to publish papers on what they themselves had discovered, because this is the way science goes. I discover something, I publish it, everybody jumps on the bandwagon and starts researching it as well. So we started to see these articles where Scientific American, and I get this magazine too, so the brain's dark energy, brain regions active when our minds wander, may hold a key to understanding neurological disorders and even consciousness itself. Brain mode may hold the key to better psychiatric diagnosis. Malfunctioning brain activity can be differentiated in people with depression, autism, schizophrenia, PTSD, body and mind, introducing the brain's default mode network. Numerous studies involving functional magnetic resonance imaging of the brain tell us that chronic back pain alters brain function well beyond the feeling of pain and can cause impairments like depression, impaired decision-making, sleep disturbances. Over here, increased default mode network connectivity associated with meditation. I deal with all these conditions in my clinic, and I use brain entrainment to help with many of them. ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, epilepsy, OCD, bipolar disorder. Many of these conditions all have certain things in common in how brain organization begins to come unraveled, and in particular communication pathway networks between the hemispheres, between the right and left hemispheres, don't communicate properly across the corpus callosum. And within a single hemisphere, you have planes of communication of different zones. And you have different zones of communication, say, from the right posterior occipital zone across diagonally to the frontal zone on the other side. There's networks going everywhere. This is the kind of thing that you can see on brain mapping EEG equipment, which I had access to for many years when I dealt with, or it was in practice with neurofeedback practitioners who had that level of kind of equipment. so I could watch how we could do brain entrainment of different communication diagonals by rotating the binaural beats in three-dimensional space to match those. This is very advanced work with brain entrainment and the use of binaural beats. Nobody's doing this stuff. So that lended me to build that into my soundtracks, like the soundtrack for the default mode network. So if I see that these two aren't synchronizing in the default mode network, I can use binaural beats that will force that to resynchronize. And we can fix these problems with default mode network unsynchronicity. And if we have the frontal zone and the posterior zone, we can rotate these binaural beats in three-dimensional space to match that. So we now have unique abilities to use advanced formulations of the use of binaural beats that cause synchronicity of zones of the cortex to come together for specific neurological conditions. And this is the kind of thing that was coming out from these research reports where various neurological conditions were deeply associated with these four zones coming unsynchronized to some degree. Schizophrenia, depression, Alzheimer's. It turns out that in Alzheimer's, you get this plaquing that forms on the brain, and the plaquing happens to form on the four zones in association with a desynchronizing of the four zones of the default mode network. Dissociative disorders, autism, ADD, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorders, bipolar disorders, all of these things have an element of the default mode network coming undone. And like I said in one of the previous broadcasts, we also see some of those symptoms associated with a deficiency of gamma brain function, the binding frequency that binds all my five senses information together into one place in a wireless internet of the brain, wireless communication networks in the brain. And when those start to come apart, then what we see and what we hear and what we feel and what we smell and what we touch don't hang together anymore. They're not synchronized. So my experience in the world becomes fractured, very similar to what we see in autism, very similar to what we see in schizophrenia. So I started using retraining of the default mode network heavily in my practice with pretty astounding results. And then I published my first generic brainwave entrainment soundtrack for the default mode network that I called Beyond. And once again, I tend to be first in a lot of these things because I don't have any real competition. There's like nobody else doing this because I guess I'm like a weird guy. But because I've got no competition, it makes me look better, I guess. I mean, I'm the first person to ever put out a brain entrainment soundtrack for a default mode network or to do clinical work with that. I'm the first person to ever put out a gamma brainwave entrainment soundtrack or to do clinical work with that. First person to do that with Epsilon, but I discovered Epsilon. The first person to do that with hypergamma and lambda, the 100 and 200 hertz frequencies, or to work with that clinically. The first person to do brain borderline states, which pretty much is the work here at CNR. So this idea that the borderline states are important as well is all our work. Nobody's doing that stuff. We're working with it clinically. So I find myself in this really weird position of being the only person that's doing significant work with patients clinically with medical monitoring systems that can advance this kind of work forward. It's high-tech, high-level 21st century sound therapy. So I started thinking, what would happen if we took a normal person? I used my brain entrainment soundtrack for the default mode network on a normal person. and hypersynchronized up those 4 zones. And that's when I began to see that other people were thinking the same way, that these articles coming through are as increased default mode network connectivity or is associated with meditation. Meditation experience is associated with differences in default mode network activity and connectivity. Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. I mean, this one here, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. Frontiers of Human Neuroscience. Non-directive meditation activates default mode network in areas associated with memory retrieval and emotional processing. Because, as I said, it's all hardwired together. This is the real place where the mind-body come together physically, connected right to the emotional network. Psychology Today. Look around and look within. The science and art of human behavior. Mind wandering and mindfulness. Neuroscience Letters. Increased default mode network connectivity associated with meditation. And, sort of on and on it goes. Meditation and neuroplasticity. Self-directed neuroplasticity. New default mode. This means, neuroplasticity means when we start to do something like this, we actually begin to change the wiring of the brain. The brain is a plastic thing. However you use the brain begins to build new pathways and highways around that function to make it work better. So a new way of using my brain will create a dirt walk path through the woods, which quickly gets paved and then turned into a road and then turned into a highway and then turned into a superhighway, depending if we use it a lot. Neuroplasticity. We can change the way our brain is wired, and that's one of the things that we are doing with this live stream. Every time all of us listen to this soundtrack together and connect our brains together for ourselves, we're rewiring our brain. And we've been doing this for almost 25 weeks now, so we are deeply into rewiring our brains together, but we're also rewiring our brains in a higher dimensional way, because we are connecting with each other through this network of the internet. And we are connecting people at great distances of each other, where our brain waves are aligning to exactly the same place and creating a mind link, and distance does not matter any longer. We're rewiring the global brain network, and that begins to create a ripple that moves out into the world, part of what we're trying to do here. Transcendental meditation activates default mode network, the brain's natural ground state. Social cognitive and affective neuroscience. Impact of meditation training on the default mode network during a restful state. It's just amazing to me. It's just scratching the surface. There's something that comes out every month associated with this kind of research. When we look at the here, when you switch off a distinctive network of brain areas not involved in focused attention, bursts into action. So here the purple ones are the default mode network, and these blue ones are focused attention network. Then we also have, aside from the default mode network, which activates when not performing a task, daydreaming, mind wandering, thinking about others, expanding your consciousness outside of yourself or some specific focus. The Salient Network, which kind of stands in between, switching between the default mode network and the central executive network. Sensory and limbic inputs means limbic has got to do with memory and emotional memory. Central executive network, here these blue zones, that's when we're doing what we're doing right now, talking, thinking, focusing. Books are starting to come out, The Power of the Wandering Mind, and not only science, but in philosophy, how it changes how you think, Or the Beatles even had it. I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in. It keeps my mind from wandering where it will go. Fixing a hole. Anyway, the idea that the deeper we get into measuring what happens in the brain and what happens in the nervous system and happens in the body with medical monitoring systems, and the more things we break through and discover about how the brain actually functions, the more insight we get into the function of consciousness itself and where it might be arising from. From quantum physics standpoint, we know that there is an infinite network and that the mind very well arises from the void, dark matter, that at the core of the quantum field, we find that smaller and smaller particles, when we break them open, actually are made of smaller resonating particles until we finally break through into a field where there's no particles at all. It's just a field of resonance forming standing waves, and nobody knows what it is that's vibrating because they can't measure it. It's too subtle. But the ancient texts of the Vedas and the I Ching teach us that that is consciousness itself. The mind arises from the grand universal field. It's not contained inside my head. My head is a focusing receptacle where it can manifest itself, but it's not the origin. The origin is everywhere. The morphogenic field, where things arise out of the field and then sink back into it. So, the fixing the hole so we can wander. The mind goes into this new type of state when the default mode network becomes more and more hyper-synchronized. So to answer my question, if we took a soundtrack and hyper-synchronized the 4 zones, then we could pick the lock of extremely high states of meditation that we've seen in other cultures. So if this is, my sense of self on the inside of my skin, and that is my sense of self on the outside of my skin, and this is my sense of time, these 2 zones, past to the future, future anticipating, and past to the present, present into the future, and that gives my sense of self in time and space. If I start to hypersynchronize those and they all start to meld and blend together, that is kind of a definition of cosmic consciousness. Expanding my consciousness outside of my personal envelope, where I can see how I affect those around me, and my community, and my country, and my planet, and my cosmos, as consciousness expands out to get a new perspective of me, this little body, on some round ball of rock someplace that's half covered with water, floating in the infinitude of everything lost, somewhere. My perspective shifts. And this idea that the default mode network puts my brain into this new type of holographic wandering function. Contemplation, pondering. Pondering is a word we don't use too often anymore. It's not thinking. It's holographic mind. It's pondering the cosmos, pondering the depths of my soul, seeing the patterns, the mathematical patterns that make it all come together, that are reflected in my body in miniature. My perspective, here we are. We're here on some minor spiral arm of some medium-sized galaxy someplace lost in nowhere. But it's not nowhere. We're getting more and more details about where this is too, where here we are down here in this corner, our little solar system. It's part of the Kuiper belt, this zone here. And this is actually just one little teeny tiny star in a cluster of stars of our local group. And this whole local group is only a little tiny zone in a minor spiral arm of a single little galaxy. that is lost in space. And that whole galaxy is just a part of many galaxies in this local cluster here. And all of these local galaxies of hundreds of billions of stars, trillions of stars, is just one little part of our local group we call the Milky Way, stuck in a huge zone of our supercluster. And the supercluster itself used to be the largest thing that we could see. You can see all these little blue, the clusters of trillions of galaxies. And those are all, now we see that there is something called these networks that are showing up of how these galaxies line up together on a web, a string of webs that looks very similar to the way the brain is put together. The web matrices of how neurons and axons are arranged in the brain are so similar that it becomes painfully obvious, and even to regular astrophysicists and scientists, where we have brain networks that look disturbingly like these cosmic webs that we're seeing that our galaxy and universe is part of, where all of a sudden everything starts to become indistinguishable from each other. And this kind of idea of the cosmic consciousness idea, where you see these patterns from the inside out, you grok them in a non-linear mind way, but a more gigantic, infinite mind perspective that we, put a little label on called cosmic consciousness. It's sort of laughable to put a name on something like this. But we do know that this is primordial. This is back to the primordial soup, where, way back in the beginning, where we began the process of realizing that the little single-cell organisms that are, fighting for the food morsels, realize that it's much more survival advantageous to form groups, form symbiotic relationships, and form multicellular organizations. Is a much better survival outcome. Everybody does better when everybody works together instead of competes together. And, it's sort of what we see now, where now all the multicellular organisms like us in the world, 9 billion people, are duking it out for the food morsels, and we need to come to a new understanding like we did 4.5 billion years ago, where something happens and we wake up and realize that it's much more survival advantageous to form symbiotic relationships and not compete, but to cooperate. And that is the struggle that we see arising in the world right now as externalized metaphor in politics and in government and in secret organizations and in big money corporations who are raping the planet and destroying its ability to support our life forms. The massive extinction of species that we are causing through polluting the planet because profits seem to be more important. This state, the externalization of some process that's going on in our collective unconscious minds, as we grapple with how far we have all strayed from the universal order of things, universal law. You don't want to go fooling around with breaking universal law, the laws of nature, because the penalty is death. It's self-imposed suicide. It's the survival of the most adaptable to one another. So that's more of the sense of what I'm trying to communicate, of how do we get in touch with the part of us that understands deeply, before a thought, this concept that the universe works together in a master plan. And when you're synchronized with that, then everything flows. And when you step outside of that and decide you want to create your own rules and screw the universal rules, I'm smarter than that, I'm better than that, I can do something all on my own. And that's where we are at, human beings. And that's the thing that now has to change. And it's not just whether we want it to change, we have to change it in order to survive. So, back at 4.5 billion years ago, when we started to get these symbiotic relationships, one of the first ones was this idea of the mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So the cell has all kinds of different organelles floating around inside. Endoplasmic reticulum and the nucleus and things like that. But the mitochondria is unique because the mitochondria is a foreign organism with different DNA than us. And every cell in your body has these little organisms, the mitochondria, because they have a chemical process called the Krebs cycle that equals ATP, or adenine triphosphate, which is the basic unit of energy of the cell. It's the energy that we require to be alive. And it's produced by these foreign critters with foreign DNA. They're the ones who produce the energy that our cells require to be alive. And our cells provide the intracellular fluid environment that is perfect, that the mitochondria requires to be alive. So they form this symbiotic relationship. You provide the environment for me to be alive, and I'll provide the energy for you to create the environment. It's like the yin-yang thing. You can see that the mitochondria has these structures inside, these folded membranes. And the biochemical processes that happen in these folded membranes is what produces, as an end product, the ATP, which is the energy of the cell. The fact that at the core of our system of being alive, the energy that allows us to be alive is produced by some foreign entity that we're in a symbiotic relationship with is pretty mind-blowing. And then later, this is when I learned this in cellular biology, sort of blew my mind. And then later, that prepped my brain for having another mind blow when we discovered the biome, that your gut is filled with 25,000 different types of bacteria that also help to digest our food, are part of our integrated network of our immune system, and communicate through the vagus nerve straight to the brain and modify my behavior and my emotions. That's pretty mind-blowing. There is a gut brain, and it communicates with some of those little biome bacteria produce electrical pulses just like brain waves, just like brain cells, and communicate through the vagus nerve to the brain. Just sort of mind-boggling. And then you realize, when I was in school, that the DNA of the mitochondria is only passed through the mother. It's not passed through the father at all. It's found, mitochondrial DNA is found in cell mitochondria and contains genetic material only from the mother. Nuclear DNA is from both parents, but mitochondrial DNA is only through the mother. And that means that that you could do, and there actually exists, a genetic mitochondrial DNA ancestral genetic trace service. We can find out your genetics by tracing the mitochondrial DNA back through the mother's line to the true biological family tree, based on tracing mitochondrial DNA back through the mother's line. This whole idea of the patriarchal line of my ancestral tree based on my last name, that is all fictitious. That's the male line. But the true biological trace of the family tree goes back through the mother, not the father. The father uses a name to trace it back. The mother uses biology to trace it back. Back to the idea that Eve was created by Adam's breaking one of his ribs off and making a woman. But in biology, I remember sitting in class in shock, realizing that the X and the Y chromosome, X is the female, Y is the male, and the X chromosome is the default chromosome. How you get a male is breaking one of those twigs off the X and it makes it into a Y. The Y chromosome is an X with one of the twigs broken off the bottom. So not only did Adam not give up a rib to make Eve, Eve broke off a rib and threw it away, and the resulting deformed X was a man. So the default would be womb man, woman. That's the default. Man with a womb. And man without a womb is the weird one. Anyway, more twisting of perspectives of how things actually truly are. And of course, this ends up in why I've got this picture, where this enters into the popular culture in the storytelling of our times, where George Lucas also had the whole idea of the mitochondria. There was this little scene in this film with Anakin Skywalker here, where he takes this blood sample and sends it back to Obi-Wan. And Obi-Wan does an analysis and says, this child has the highest midi-chlorian count I've ever seen. What does that mean? It's even greater than Master Yoda. And the little boy asks, what is midi-chlorians? Sounds suspiciously like mitochondria, doesn't it? What are midi-chlorians anyway? And his explanation is midi-chlorians, the Jedi have identified microscopic life forms that reside within all living cells called midi-chlorians. These tiny life forms communicate with the Force and reveal its will. When one's mind is quiet, one can hear them speaking. A high midi-chlorian count indicates great potential as a Jedi. So how cool is that? I remember thinking to myself at one point when I realized that all the bacteria in our gut and all over our body and the mitochondria and all the rest, there are more of them than there are cells in our own body. There are more mitochondria than there are cells, because each cell in your body has multiple mitochondria. The heart cell has the most mitochondria of all. The heart cell, because the heart is beating all the time, needs huge amounts of energy, and so it has tens of thousands of mitochondria per each heart cell to generate the energy necessary. So we have more mitochondria than we do us. And what that could possibly mean is that consciousness comes from them, and that you and I, with our cellular network in our body, is like a horse that draws the cart, and the guy who is directing the cart is the mitochondria. That our consciousness is not us; it's a foreign entity. It's from outer space. Think on that for a few minutes. It's entirely possible that this body is just the vehicle that mitochondria are using, and they are connected to the Force. They're the ones connected to the network of consciousness. It comes through them. And they need a body in order to survive to make that happen. How crazy is that idea? So as we expand our consciousness, as I described with those little pictures of how we move from our local planet into our solar system, and our solar system into the local network, and the local network into a little spiral arm of our galaxy, and the galaxy is just one of many in a larger group, and that's one of many in a massive network that looks like brain cells and axons tied together. All of these sort of things is the kind of idea of what comes to my mind when I think of expanding consciousness. And it goes both directions. I can expand my consciousness outside of my own physical vehicle and expand it out and to include other people and my community and my planet and my galaxy and the universe. And I can begin to see the patterns that mimic at micro scales and macro scales, where it's all like a fractal, where it's all like a hologram, where the entire thing is contained in miniature in every part of it. The sinking down into the network at the quantum scale, we see similar type of network organizations as we see in supergalactic nebula. And when we think about the idea that you can now use science and brain entrainment and synchronizing of the hemispheres and binaural beats and 3D rotation and all the rest of it, and we can untune one channel to the left by 180 degrees and create a phase cancellation of consciousness, of thinking mind itself in the center of your brain, and create an open place. We are now explorers of a new frontier of using high-tech science for a whole new level of access to higher dimensional conscious states that people have been trying to open in every culture on Earth since the beginning, with various meditation techniques that took years and decades to master. And now we have high-tech shortcuts to allow us to open these places in ourselves. And the only people really who are attracted to this kind of madcap idea are the old souls who understand that this is not madness. The old souls who instinctively know the truth of this, that this is entirely possible. Of course, this is the way it's networked up, because I've been there before. I did spend 30, 40, 50 years meditating in countless lifetimes. I've been there. And now this is a way for me to get it back pronto. I don't have to spend the 50 years. I already did that work. So here we are. I had one question from the questions that came in. Many people were asking what was the soundtrack I played in the background last time when I was reading the verses of the 10 Bulls, and that was the Epsilon soundtrack. The idea was to network everybody into a higher level understanding of metaphysics, which is what that does. Other things that were on that list, which I will be covering, this has already been planned in future broadcasts, is pregnancy and the womb and sound and binaurals, structured water, and that will be part of a talk I give when I'm talking about homeopathy. Memory and learning, I actually have a soundtrack for memory and learning to pick the lock of a program. That's one of those border states between theta and delta, the memory learning soundtrack. Someone was asking me, how do I find the frequency for an individual vertebra or for a liver or whatever. I did discuss that in a previous one, but I'll get deeper into that when I talk about applied kinesiology and how that whole system works and how it could be used. And people had questions about individual sort of medically named diseases, neurological conditions, and what could be done for that. And I will discuss that in much more detail in future broadcasts when we discuss epilepsy and bipolar disorder and those kind of conditions and how we approach those, where they're coming from and why they're there, and a holistic approach to fixing them. For now, the present soundtrack we're going to listen to is the deeper level of the default mode network, which is track 2 of Beyond. And like all of these, I have taken great liberties with a small portion of that soundtrack, and I've expanded it out, and I have done things with the speed, and I have built new elements into it and created new kind of 3D processing. So it's a transformed portion of track 2 of the default mode network. But this is the deep default mode network at 1 pulse every 20 seconds, the deep one that they found. More expanded, more gigantic. And so, headphones, please. Here's the address for that soundtrack. Thank you all for being here with me. It's my honor and joy and pleasure. Peace and love and happiness and health. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you here